Hello, I'm Kiran Kamble, and today I'm going to talk about part 2 of chapter 3, specifically construct validity and external validity. So, what is external validity? It is the extent to which a causal relationship identified in an experiment can be extrapolated across different units, treatment, observations, and settings, as we have looked early in earlier chapters. Now, in the textbook, there is an example given of a transitional employment training demonstration experiment, which entailed assessing the effect of training along with unsubsidized and potentially permanent job placement by randomly assigning 18 to 40-year-old adults with mental retardation to a control and a treatment group. The results that were found out was that the treatment group had better job placements and earnings. So it's a good, the results were good in terms of the outcome. But the authors, however, considered serious questions about external validity in the experiment. What were those? The first is they found that the results were better for those people, as these were all supposed to be mentally retarded group of people selected for the study. They found that the better results were for those with higher IQ or those who were adventurous and ready to venture out. Second, the type of job that these people were placed in also had a role to play on the outcome. And third, the experiment was geographically biased. There were no sites in the south of the country. Also, there was an element of self selection bias as only 5% of the population uh, who were reached out to participate in the study agreed to participate in the study. So that shows a self-selection bias. And that's why the authors feel that because of all these threats, the study could not translate to either similar or dissimilar Utahs. Now let's see what are the targets of generalization. The book talks about five diverse targets of generalization. One is generalization from narrow to broad. Second is from broad to narrow. Third is generalization at a similar level of aggregation. And fourth, generalization to a similar or different Utahs, especially concerned with units. And the fifth uh, point they talk about is from a random sample, generalization from a random sample to a population from where the sample is drawn, which is what we are used to seeing in typical studies. Now, why did some researchers downplay the importance of external validity? We have some group school of thought which really doesn't give that much credence to external validity. Why? Some researchers do not accord that importance to external validity because, according to them, the issue of external validity is raised after the fact, after the study is completed, and rarely thought about during the study. And they also say that inferences to an unspecified population from a specific sample of Utahs is unscientific. That's what they say. Now, the book, although talks about the utility of having inferences from completed studies to as yet unstudied population. Why? That is external validity. Why does the book think it is of utility? So, book authors do mention that such inferences to an as yet unstudied population is very important. They specifically state that incremental extension of theory and experiment into untested realms is the basic tenet of science. This being incremental extensions of some study operations at a time, given at a time over a period of time. It increases, they are justifiable and they increase the knowledge base of that particular field. And they're also cost effective. They bring cost effectiveness to the field as well. And if you see the field of medical science, without such approach of applying to the as yet unstudied population, we wouldn't have seen the development of vaccines, drugs, and various successful treatments. It's not possible to trace all the drugs and vaccines on each and everybody in the population. So let's move on to the next topic. Now, the textbook talks about threats to external validity from the lens of interactions. Why? The textbook very cogently states how estimates of the extent of generalization of a causal relationship across Utahs is fundamentally similar to testing for statistical inferences, interactions, which we are used to doing in statistical analysis, those who are used to doing statistical analysis. Therefore, it is logical that interactions can be linked to the threats to external validity. The authors further specify in the textbook that interactions are not only statistical interactions, they clarify that it can be philosophical or theoretical interactions as well, and which is very important when it comes to making inferences about as yet unstudied population, because there it's very difficult, if not impossible, to do any or to identify any statistical interactions. Now, what are the threats to external validity? The threats to external validity, as talked earlier, are looked at in the book through the lens of interactions. So, the first threat is interaction of causal relationship with units. Here, the book implies that transposing a causal relationship noted on specific units in a study, like gender, race, or facility type, and transposing it to other units may not hold. The generalization may not stand. The remedy is having randomization while maintaining statistical conclusion validity, because we've seen, or we'll see later, that raising one can lead to reduction of the statistical conclusion validity. Also, it is important to avoid self-selection biases. Now, threat number two is interaction of causal relationship over treatment variations. So any variation in treatment, either intentional, owing to funding constraints, change in pace of treatment, or administration change in length of treatment, administration, etc., or combining or unintentional variations in treatment, such as treatment maturation, change in interpretation of underlying constructs, etc., may pose a threat to external validity of causal relationship. The solution the book suggests is diligently identifying variations in treatment and controlling for them to the extent possible. Threat number three the book talks about is interaction of causal relationship with outcome. So we've seen causal relationship with units, treatment. Now let's see the outcomes. Now there are usually, we know that multiple outcomes in a study. Very rarely there will be single outcome that will be, even if that is intended, there will be multiple other outcomes. And some are intended, as I mentioned, and some can be unintended. And for some treatments will have positive impact on one outcome, negative on another, or no impact on some outcome. Now, the outcomes also may vary similarly across different units and settings. Hence, a causal relationship for a specific outcome may not hold across different outcomes. Now, what is the solution? The solution may be, like consultation, extensive consultations before, while designing a study, and during conduction of a study, to avoid any ambiguity over the study outcomes. So everybody knows what the expected outcome from the study is. Now, threat number four is interaction of causal relationship with settings. So we saw units, outcomes, treatments, now settings. Change in settings, be it geographical, environmental, job location, etc., will create a threat to external validity. We all know it. And solution can be expensive. Means we can't have a study designed for each different setting. So using multi-site study location has proven effective, but as mentioned, it can be expensive. Lastly, there is a fifth threat that the book talks about is context dependent mediation. Now, usually a causal relationship, there are some evident, some hidden mediation processes. In any experiment, in any study, there are certain processes. We cannot identify all of them. And a process mediation working in one setting for specific units and treatments may not work in different setting, even for the same units and treatments. So the solution is labor intensive actually, means by studying all the mediator variables across different contexts and test their consistency by statistical methods like, say, using a multi-group statistical equation models and etc., and then identifying them and then controlling for them. So it's pretty labor intensive. So these are the five threats to external validity from the lens of interactions. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, the book brings a new concept, a very interesting concept, I would say, about constancy of effect size and constancy of causal direction. So, what are these? Let's see. So, constancy of effect size deals with the magnitude of the interaction, that is, the threat to external validity that would threaten generalizability. So, that's the constancy of effect size. Assessing such constancy of effect sizes has significance statistically, as a study with high power would detect even minor effect sizes. It is important philosophically, as the book says, as if the world is full of interactions. There are no studies without any interaction, or no happenstance in the real world without any interactions. And it is also important empirically, as no study goes without assessing interactions. If we don't assess interactions, the study would be rendered invalid. However, the book argues that focusing on constancy of effect sizes would render only a few generalizations feasible because they are so stringent. Instead, the book proposes that constancy of causal direction, which would usually remain constant across levels of a moderator, the direction would generally remain constant, is a better parameter. So, constancy of causal direction is a better parameter for judging generalization. Now, textbook, uh, specifically states that generalizations often is approximately conceptualized as constancy of causal direction. That the sign of causal relationship is constant across levels of moderator. Now, how does that book state they make this statement? Well, there are four reasons given by the book for such statement. One, there are a lot of meta-analysis. If we look at them, the causal signs usually are constant across. So if you look at different studies for a specific outcome, most of them will show the same causal direction. Though the effect sizes may vary, the sample sizes and etc. will vary accordingly, but the causal direction remains the same. Second, in the real world, in the world of public policy, there is no luxury of constancy of effect sizes. The policies are usually implemented to the entire population based on the constancy of causal direction. If there is a repeated evidence of a causal relationship, no matter what the magnitude, then it is sufficient enough for implementation of public policy and feasible enough. The third factor the book talks about is many theories and concepts that we use in day to day science are based on such causal relationships, not the effect sizes. And the fourth reason is, or the factor that the book mentions, is that scientific theory is by nature reductionist. So we in science we talk about breaking down complex structures, complex information into simpler ones that can be easily digested. And in such scenario, having focusing on effect sizes, which is again e- entering into a complexity zone, is not feasible. That's why uh, the constancy of causal direction is a better uh, approach towards towards determining generalization. Now let's move to the next question. Now the book talks about construct validity and external validity and internal validity and construct validity. First, let's look at what are the similarities and differences between construct validity and external validity. So, construct validity and external validity are related in two ways. First, both are generalizations. One about underlying constructs, that's construct validity, and the other about causal relationship, that's external validity. And second reason is that second similarity is that understanding the constructs help better understand the external validity. So knowing the construct validity will help us better determine external validity. For example, a field like medicine where theories are well developed, as we just saw in the last question, construct validity and external validity are very well aligned, but which is not the case in most other fields, but that's about the field of medicine. Now, what are the differences between construct validity and external validity? There are four major differences. One depends on the kind of inferences made. So construct validity infers about the underlying constructs, whereas external validity infers about causal relationship. Excuse me. Now, second is construct validity generalizations have nothing to do with causal inferences, whereas external validity generalizations are all about causal inferences. Third point is both of differences, both validities can be contradictory, meaning when construct validity is correct or right, the external validity may not be valid, and vice versa. And the fourth differentiating factor is the test methods are different. So construct validity is about proper detailing of the construct, whereas external validity is about testing the size and direction of the causal relationship. Now, what are the differences and similarities between internal validity and construct validity? So, internal validity uh, are related to each other. Internal validity and construct validity are related to each other in terms of both are affected by the confounds. That is, the variables that are conceptually distinct but empirically undistinguishable from the other independent variables in a study. So, these confounding variables, as we know them, are equally important for construct validity as well as excuse me, internal validity. Now, this relationship between internal validity and construct validity is further enumerated or explained by some common threads they share. What are these threads? The book talks about resentful demoralization, compensatory equalization, compensatory rivalry, and treatment diffusion. Now, what are the differences between these two, the internal validity and construct validity? The first difference is the threads that we just referred to, those four threads. Now, these threads, how they will affect each of these validity depends on the confounds that are faced under each of this validity. So that is the difference. The common threads, but they are faced differently depending on the different confounds each of the validity faces. Now, internal validity, the second difference is internal validity concerns causality, whereas construct validity is about linkages with the underlying construct. Now, let's move to the next point. So, the textbook says that threats to validity are heuristic devices. What does that mean? So, let's see what heuristic device actually means in general parlance. Heuristic devices are typically concepts that are merely used as aid to analysis. So they are not ends in itself, they are means to the ends, as described by Oxford Reference Directory. Sorry. So the threads help researchers choose priorities and make trade-offs in a study to align the study operations with the main objective, and that's why they are called as heuristic devices. Now, the book also mentions that it is impossible to successfully avoid all threats related to four types of validity. There should be trade-offs and priorities among validity types. So let's explain this particular concept. It is indeed, we all know, to us in the field of research, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to counter all the threats to each of the four types of validity. Means identifying them and countering them, it's nearly impossible. So unless of course it is a long-term research project where you have different experiments over a period of time, you can maybe face most of the threats, but not in single standalone experiments. So setting priorities and making trade-offs uh, to better align the study operations with the study objectives is the most practical approach that is possible. So let's see how. So for example, if you increase the sample size to improve statistical conclusion validity, then you have to consider that the trade-off will be reduced internal validity. Similarly, random assignment will help strengthen internal validity, but external validity may be weakened. Also, the extent of construct validity can be enhanced using multiple operations, as we've seen. Mono operations reduce the construct validity extent, but multiple operations will enhance it. But then at the same time, this will also create a risk for the statistical conclusion validity. So it depends on the study, what is the focus of the study, and accordingly one has to make a trade-off. But the book also cautions that the trade-offs have to be necessary and justifiable. Unnecessary trade-offs are of no importance. The book mentions about a quote, internal validity is a sine qua non. So what is this and why or why not? Internal validity is a sine qua non. Internal validity is a sine qua non is a famous statement by Campbell and Stanley in 1963. Their argument was that internal validity is the basic minimum for an experiment, while external validity, though important, can never be fully assessed, so not as important as internal validity. This notion, however, was countered by Cronbach in 1982, stating that his statement was that internal validity is trivial, past time, and local, while external validity is forward looking. Now, in my opinion, both are equally important, and the relevance or the real importance is very contextual. So, for example, with internal validity, without internal validity established, I don't think we can even think about external validity. So, it depends on what the focus of the study is. If the focus of the study is internal validity, then internal validity is a sine qua non. But if it is external validity, then external validity is the sine qua non. And in today's world, where applicability of any research is the most important thing sought after, external validity has become much more important than internal validity because it's the so what of the experiment. So you found something, but so what? So is it applicable to other settings? Now the book mentions that external validity is a desideratum. So what does that mean? It's just another Latin word for sine qua non, actually. So Campbell and Stanley, when they talk about internal validity as sine qua non, they also mention in the same breath or in the same argument that external validity is a desideratum, which is again in Latin means which something that is needed or wanted. So they do accept that external validity is important, though they mention that it is only for in the field of educational research that external validity becomes much more important. So that was the lecture for today. Thank you.